Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and we are here today to talk through what's been happening in the world of television and film, and what you should maybe talk about, read about, hear about, watch, whatever it is you want to do. With me, as always, my co-host, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. I feel like there actually is a lot of stuff, new stuff out there, and actually there's a lot to wade through. I think we could be very helpful today in terms of what people should be checking out and what maybe they could skip, because there's a lot of stuff on TV.
There's a lot of stuff on TV. We mentioned some of the stuff coming up. I have checked out the first episode of Kaos, and there's some other new shows to talk about. There's some news to get to. There's we talk a lot about House of the Dragon, and everyone's waiting with bated breath because one George Martin is gonna drop a blog post on us at some point.
Wow, a piece of writing from George R. R. Martin that we're all waiting for it to come out. How surprising! That's surprising, Taryn.
Yeah.
Specifically though, it's not just that he said he's going to write about House of the Dragon. He says things went wrong with House of the Dragon. That's the tease he gave, Taryn.
He needs to share everything that's gone wrong, which
Yeah.
I'm very curious about. Obviously, I think a lot of people are very curious. A lot of people feel very critical of season 2. I think it was a very good season with some big problems, and I think that those problems have overshadowed a lot of the good. But I could certainly see why one George Martin might be frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rings of Power dropped last Thursday. Was a bit of a gamble to figure out when that was actually going to drop, but it did. And then you and I dropped a podcast about the first 3 episodes. Industry keeps going. Only Murders in the Building has debuted a new season. There's a lot on TV right now, Taryn.
There is. What's interesting to me is that I feel like with House of the Dragon, George Martin, he felt very aligned with the show in season 1. We were hearing a lot from him about the show and how he felt good about it, and he was working close with Ryan Condal. And it was very promising to know that George Martin was involved in the show, considering he wasn't really involved in the back half of Game of Thrones. And so season 2 seemed like a bit of a further deviation in a way that we kind of anticipated, because the show really needs to slow down in a way that the book just doesn't. It's like a history book. But there are some more significant deviations. And it's very interesting to hear that apparently, like, George Martin, I assume if he feels like he has problems that he needs to address with the show, I assume that once again, he's kind of been not as involved by his choice or by not his choice. And I think, again, a lot of people are interested in hearing what he has to say.
Well, there's one other big difference between season 1 and season 2 that I'm going to completely speculate about here, Taryn, which is that they did lose a showrunner from season 1 to season 2. Miguel Sapochnik, who worked on Game of Thrones, has won outstanding directing for a drama series. He was involved in season 1, and there was sort of a story that came out that he was stepping away from producing. I believe he is still executive producer on the show moving forward, but he is not show running it. It's strictly a Ryan Condal show run. And I do wonder, I mean, I have no insight into this, as to what was George R. R. Martin's relationship to the show, and if it was potentially closer to Sapochnik than it was Condal. Did that mean that things changed in season 2? I think that in terms of, it's funny, like we're talking about like deviations. I mean, George R. R. Martin has come out and said, do not think of the show as a strict but like this is what happened based on the way the book was written. So like, you're not supposed to think of them as connected, that like, when things are different, it's not that like, oh, that's what it could have, like, it could be that in the book. Like, George R. R. Martin doesn't even really want us to think about it. That's how I've kind of found my most enjoyment as a book reader from watching House of the Dragon. I think maybe less so deviations, because the way that the book is written, like I think that there's plenty of room to think that like, oh, the show is in line with the book, except it's just a version of events that Condell is maybe choosing to interpret instead of what George R. R. Martin decided to, the way it actually happened, but the way he wrote the book being this retelling from a maester. And so I am super intrigued to see what are the things that George is what he thinks went wrong. If you had to place sort of your finger like on the a guess beforehand, do you have an idea of like what in particular George R. R. Martin might think went wrong with House of the Dragon season 2? Because I think
I
it's
know
different than what the audience thinks went wrong with season 2.
I know what I think went wrong, and I've documented that in our recaps.
Mhm. Mhm.
So obviously, like I'm gonna be biased to thinking that maybe he feels similarly. I'm not sure, but I know that he cared a lot about like wanting it to feel like there were no heroes and villains. Like
Mhm.
there wasn't one
Mhm.
side that you should be rooting for more than the other. And it felt like season two leaned even more heavily in the direction of very clearly one side is the good side, one side is the bad side. And I could imagine that that might be an issue of his.
Yeah, I wonder if he's gone on record to say that Damon is his favorite character, and I don't know that he would maybe have much to say about in the way that he thought the Damon storyline was it, because I think there's many ways in which what they actually did with Damon this season is actually more in line with what like they often did in Game of Thrones, especially early Game of Thrones. That like this guy goes over here and he's going to do this thing for a while before he gets like woven back in to the story. Maybe it wasn't executed. I think I'm higher on it than you are, but I actually think like I wonder if Amond, who is a character who I really struggled with, feeling like he wasn't sort of given enough and he wasn't kind of complicated enough, or we were told a lot about how he was. It was very much like a bad guy in the show. I don't think it's a coincidence that like his name is, what's the word for this? Like if you mix up the letters, they spell Damon. I think
Portmanteau,
if
yeah.
yeah, if he loves if he loves Damon, I would assume he maybe also is interested in Amon, and that's where I think some of the weakest stuff was. And I think it's because of the stuff you're saying, where Amon was written entirely to be the bad guy this season, in a way that I didn't find that compelling. So, interested to see if he is to drop a blog post about what went wrong in House of the Dragon. Will there be a little rough that he's just out there? I mean, if you're the HBO marketing department,
Right.
a little rough that George is going to
I
be like,
mean, this is probably the most he's come out against. Like the show is
uh,
still on the air. Like season 3 is coming.
yeah, yeah.
So for George to be talking about how he has like problems with it and that he's gonna write a blog post, everything. I imagine that HBO is like on the phone with him, like
Please don't
call
write
like
the blog.
George, what are you talking about? What is this blog post? Do we not have a contract? I don't know if they have a contract. I'm sure they are doing everything in their power to get on top of this blog post.
Well, they
But
keep
I'm
leaving
very
a message for him that says, George, please don't write. And then he hears in his head, the winds of winter. But they actually said this blog.
yeah, I mean very much they're like, listen,
uh,
we really want you to write this blog post. When is it coming out already,
that's
George?
right. That's
We
right.
got, I have. Why haven't you gotten to it yet? And then I mean, that's the strategy to get him to stop.
True. Um, One thing we didn't, I don't know that we revisited this. I feel like we speculated on this, but I feel like in retrospect, actually, after an interview with Abigail Thorne, where you asked this great question about one of her first lines in the show is something like, I'm a poet, I'm a philosopher, something along the words philosopher get thrown out. And we asked, was that like intentionally written for you? Did you improv it, ad lib it, blah, blah? And Abigail said, nope, that was the way it was written in the show. And due to the writer's strike, we were not allowed to rewrite anything. And I think that when you think about that in connection with the way people feel about the end of season 2, that I think this gives me some firm belief that they actually likely maybe could not rewrite anything. And when they found out they had to go from 10 episodes to 8, all they
Mhm.
could do was chop those 2 episodes off and say, we'll do them. Whether or not we are going to get at the start of season 3 the episodes that would have been 9 and 10 of season 2, I think it's very likely when you look at the way that the season was paced out, that if you, again, I don't think that, I think we now can't say episode 9 being this like, or the penultimate episode being the big episode of a season of Game of Thrones. I don't think that that can be true based on what we got in season 1 and season 2. But if you imagine they had planned to do that in season 2, and now the first episode we're going to get season 3 would have been the penultimate episode, which would be this seemingly going to war episode, and then a following episode that would be a bit of a cool down. I think that that probably makes a ton of sense. And maybe I don't really know why they wouldn't just say we got locked into a bit of a writer's. So, I mean, I guess it's because like that's why you need writers to rewrite the thing, and they moved forward and did it anyway, knowing that they couldn't change anything. That's probably the reason why they didn't just say, well, we just chopped off 2 episodes. Because it would show how important writers are and how you should pay them. I know the strike's over, but they went through with that during the season. I think that that feels pretty likely, Sharon. And that's, again, my best estimate, but I feel pretty strongly in it that that's what happened with the pacing of the season.
I mean, it certainly connects a lot of dots. It makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. All right. Well, speaking of big fantasy shows, as you mentioned, Rings of Power dropped 3 episodes. Uh, which it's 3 episodes is a lot. A lot of 3 episodes is a lot when they're over an hour each. I was not a fan of the 3 episode drop. We did watch the episodes. We put out a recap of those 3 episodes. We will continue to cover Rings of Power. It's been an interesting response, I think, for Rings of Power online because the first season was, I would say, critically acclaimed to some degree. There were a lot of critics that enjoyed season 1 of Rings of Power, but that the like, I will call them the like YouTube, Reddit contingent, had a lot of issues perhaps with Rings of Power. And then like the general audience, it did seem to have good ratings. So they seemed to, I think it was fine, or enjoy it. So this season, it's been interesting because I've seen a lot of that same hypercritical approach to season 2, but it's been met with some backlash, where like a lot of people are like, it's actually it's not that bad. Like I don't know why people are acting like this is the worst thing in the world. Like it's actually at least fine. And uh, and that's been very interesting to me, and I think it's a more sort of measured approach to this show, which I do think is pretty good. It's definitely not terrible, and I'm curious to see if the season continues to gather some momentum in terms of having some actual sort of like defenders, I guess, or supporters.
Yeah, so I saw a couple articles going around this past weekend talking about the Rotten Tomato score for Rings of Power and how it was being sort of framed as like controversial series raises Rotten Tomato scores is basically what I saw. Overall, the series has, I think, an 84% critic rating and a 49% audience score. Those go up, well, for season 1, it's 83 critic, 38 audience, and then so far this season, 86 critic, 61 audience. So basically, what's showing is that like what you're saying,
Pretty good
critics seem.
representation of what I just said. Yeah.
I know exactly, and so then I'm seeing this article about how like, oh, it went up. So for both the critic, so it's a both for both critics and for the audience, people seem to be higher on season 2 so far. The thing is about the show is that it is for sure a success for Amazon Prime. I believe it's the most watched Amazon Prime show. Most sorry, I should correct it. I think the language they use, again, be careful about how we say it, but it's the most watched original series on Amazon Prime. So something that they
Mm.
created. So that means that they might have gotten a series that they purchased from somewhere else and got added to the platform, and it might be more watched. But in terms of original series, it's still incredibly expensive to make the show. Like they've put a ton of money into this show. There was also a Forbes article from about a year ago showing that only about 37% of people finished season 1. And so I think when you put that all together, I think like in terms of like telling the story about Rings of Power thus far, is I think it's a good show. I think that I understand the changes that they have either chosen to make or almost had to make. I do think the show is very we the word I think we used on the recap pod is that they participate in engagement bait of like there's a lot of stuff in the show where it's like we're not going to tell you the name of this character so that you create a YouTube video to be like, who is this character in Rings of Power? And you try to guess who it is to drive engagement for our show in a way that I think has both worked and not worked in the show. I think it's good, but it is a lot. I think like if you're not into this type of thing, and there's so much like lore heavy stuff that I think like you've been talking about watching the show in terms of like as a vibesy show. And I think that there are people who will try to watch the show who like, who sort of who can't just sit and watch as a vibe. You like
They're
want to
taking
understand what's happening.
notes and checking the appendices.
Yeah, and I even think like I don't even mean like the most hardcore Tolkien, Lord of the Rings people. I think there are some people who like they want a show that is almost a little bit, and it's just not an insult to them, but I think it's fair to say like people don't always want a show that like they don't understand. I remember this coming out of the first Dune movie, and I loved it, and I fell in love with it, and I actually loved how kind of like they didn't try to hold my hand and be like, someone turning to the camera being like, that means this thing. It's like I almost wanted to like then get to dive in and explore it myself in a way that I think Lord of the Rings kind of fits into that bucket. It's just so much content. It does do that a lot of times. And I think if you're like feeling like, I don't know what's going on, there are definitely people who like, I have friends who will tune out of that show. So in terms of like, I think between the ratings, I think the season is better than the first season so far. I feel like what they're doing, there's definitely weak plot points, but also this idea that like people watch it and drop away from it. That feels not great, but I think I understand where that's coming from based on the content of Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
Huh. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that like it's hard to rebound when you have this initial onslaught. We just saw The Acolyte was canceled. I know I'm a big Wheel of Time fan on Amazon. I've really enjoyed seasons 1 and 2. I think they've had their issues. But like the overall sentiment about that show is so overwhelmingly negative online that it's even when it has like really good moments, it's hard to find room to breathe in discussion. And we're even starting to see this like House of the Dragon is starting to fall into that category of like the fans, these like hardcore genre fans are turning on it. And so it's interesting to see what might be a show starting to reach out of that pit and have some more, I would say again, room to breathe in discussion. I think that genre in particular tends to have fans that are very, very particular. Yeah, I'm curious. I've enjoyed the first 3 episodes. I'm excited to watch 1 episode in a week instead of 3.
Yeah, I go
I
back and
honestly,
forth on
that's
whether
probably
they should have dropped 3 or not because I do think we talked about it. I feel like after 3 episodes, I understand why they did it because what we basically got was every story that we saw in season 1 ended up being included in an episode, but one of them didn't come until episode 3. So then I feel like they decided to sort of drop that on us all at once.
Well, I mean, I
In
think
a
that's the
way,
general strategy for Amazon. It's what they always do is they drop 2 or 3 episodes at
I
once.
know, but 3 is a lot. 3 is a lot,
It
Taryn,
is.
3 is a lot. It's a lot of
I
content to get through.
I
When
don't
you're
like
already
it.
feeling like like I feel like this all the time. I feel like I'm like behind on stuff. Like this is a poor example. Like I'm like an episode behind the challenge, and I keep being like, I gotta watch the challenge. But then Rings of Power drops 3 episodes on me.
Well, I mean, I just think it's like it's the worst of all worlds, I think, where you have this initial drop and that means all of a sudden there's 3.5 hours to 3 hours 40 minutes maybe of Rings of Power content that you need to watch within the week before the next one comes out. You can't really get into any kind of spoilery discussion about it with people who are also watching it because, oh, I haven't watched the 3rd episode yet. I haven't found the time for the final hour and a half of this viewing experience. Um, and so you have all the downsides of that like binge model with none of the upsides of like I got to binge the whole show because it's just 3 episodes and now I have to wait. Which means you get none of people are talking about Rings of Power, but only vaguely, only in the tastemaker way because they can't really talk about specifics too hard because not everyone's caught up yet. And so, as opposed to 1 episode where like you could all be talking about the same thing and what happened and how you feel about it. And so all of that, I feel like, diminishes this first week of discussion. And then by the time you start getting into the week to week, like that momentum has been lost of this is a new show that just dropped. And so I don't know. From my perspective, it feels like taking the worst half of both methods. But that's also, certainly coming from my perspective, where I want to do recaps. I want to listen to podcasts about this show, and it's tough to fit that sort of model in. I mean, it's better, I guess, in that sense, it's better than a weekly or a pure binge. But yeah, it wasn't my favorite.
I mean, I think the answer to this is, and when this thing always comes up, and I feel like this conversation is done to death, even on We Know Scripted TV, which is not that many months old, which is like, should shows be dropping in a binge or should they be dropping weekly? And my actual answer to that is, my obvious preference is that shows get dropped weekly, because when a show is a hit, it's more fun when it's weekly, and it's better when it's weekly, and it's more, you can dive in more. But my actual answer is like, it actually just depends on what show is being dropped. And there are shows that I am so happy when they drop in a binge and I get to just like watch it in a weekend, the weekend it came out, or like I not even get to it right away, but I know that by the time I get to it in like 2 weeks, it's all out, as opposed to like maybe only two of the episodes are out. And I do think like this is the Amazon Prime way. And I actually think this is better than the all at once binge drop way. I think this would have been a nightmare if Lord of the Rings. Um, but I think that this is probably, it's such a heavy show. There's so much to digest in the show that I just don't think this probably 3 episodes at first was not the right way for this show. But there might be an Amazon Prime show that shows up in a couple weeks, and I'm like, I get the idea of being like, let's really hook you in, and it feels like you've had more of an investment in the show if you've watched 3 out of 10 of the episodes or whatever, right? But who knows?
I mean, I will say for my viewing habits right now and in general would be that if there are 3 episodes right away, I'm not watching all three at once. I'm not going to catch up in time for the week to week. I'm just going to keep watching them, and at some point, I'm going to catch up and run out of episodes
Right,
and be annoyed.
right.
And like, wait, the season isn't done yet, but I was watching at my own pace, and now I can't. And so yeah, it's not my favorite, but um, what else is on, Grace? Because, there's some other shows to talk about
Yeah.
here.
Well, one show. There's a couple of shows I mostly ended up watching shows that I am podcast. So I watched Rings of Power, and then I watched Industry. I will say, Taran, I thought this week's episode of Industry was one of the best of the series, if not the best episode of the series so
I heard
far.
it was good.
It was a little bit of a separate story that kind of dived into a character that we have not really been focused on. He is in the it's the Rishi character. He is on the cover art for the promotional material for season 3, but he has never been a character that he is in any story the central figure in a story. And this one was basically entirely him. Couple of scenes where that intersects with characters that we do follow and watch on the show. And I said this, and I think that the reason this episode worked so well is because we were basically taking a character that we know nothing about except what he puts on at work, and we just like ripped him open and dove in, and it was quite anxiety inducing. It was quite stressful, but I thought it was a very, very excellent character work that they did this week. So I very much enjoyed chatting with that about with Josh and Emily, and think I just do believe that the show has sort of like stepped up in terms of getting that promotion into the Sunday night slot, of meeting, I think, the expectations, at least I had and some other folks had, of it being sort of in the more prime time Sunday night slot. I think it is definitely meeting that, and this is a show that I think, we talked about the ratings numbers a few weeks ago. I imagine they're doing less than the 300,000 people who watched it previously. I don't think that this is a show that's like getting a bunch of people to tune in. I mean, it's not like, oh my god, you have to go, you have to watch it live and be there.
What I was gonna say, I like those like one-off episodes that like dig into side characters. I think of them as like the Lindelof, because it was really like, Lost and then The Leftovers. Like he loves doing that. And I think they're always like some of the best episodes. I just really, they really like flesh out the world and the other characters in such cool ways. I think that TV has like a great opportunity to make those work uh, well. I hear what you're saying though. I think that I agree. I think that I've been hearing more about industry, and I had heard specifically that this was like an Emmy worthy episode, and I think that that is exactly where they want to be. Pick up some Emmy attention, especially when like a lot of these other shows are have like gone away. Like, what's the new big drama? Like, what kind of opportunities are available for you? And I think that if they get some critical acclaim, some attention in that way, then who knows? Season 4 plus could get some heat. So
Yeah.
interesting stuff there.
Only Murders in the Building came back as well. Just dropped one episode so far. I thought it was pretty fun. It's slotting back into exactly what you can expect from that show. So I know they're covering on the weekend program. I really enjoyed episode one. Excited to see what they do more, but only one episode has dropped so far. The other thing, Taryn, I did not get a chance to watch this. I wanted to, but the thing that I'm hearing is very, very good is Terminator Zero. Am I getting
Yeah,
the name right? Let's make sure.
Terminator Zero.
It dropped with 100% critical score on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's now dropped to 92%, but it has been something that people are saying is very, very good, and I'm excited to check it out. I know Josh Wigler is a big Terminator person, so we might need him to illuminate. Is this something you're interested? What's your Terminator? Do you have any relationship to the Terminator franchise?
So, I mean, I watched them all.
Yeah.
It's typical me. I've watched them all, but like, yeah, it's fine. I was curious to check this out. I have not yet. I feel like Netflix animated shows
Mm,
tend to be very hit or miss for me. I did like. I'm pretty sure Cyberpunk was a Netflix one as well. I thought that was pretty good. Um, I wasn't as big a fan of the whatever it was called, the League of Legends show. Um, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Arcane, thank you, Jess in the chat. That we'll see. I think I'm curious to see if I enjoy Terminator Zero. But there was another Netflix show that I did check out. We mentioned this last week that Chaos on Netflix dropped this week. This is the show by Charlie Cavell, who had made End of the F***ing World on Netflix a while ago now. Man, that started in 2017. Was also a guy behind the guy behind Humans. I think the British version, which was the better version. So uh, he has a very distinct kind of style. I think if you watched End of the Effing World, then you kind of get the style. It's very kind of like fun, quick, kind of like uh rough around the edges, but like fast paced kind of fun stuff. I enjoy it. And Chaos is like a Greek mythology tale in modern times, with Jeff Goldblum playing Zeus. And I thought it was great. I watched one episode. I watched the first episode. So I have not watched the whole thing is out already. 8 episodes. I've seen one, and I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was really funny. It was really interesting. And I just like the whole way through, I was just like, this is just a good time. And so far, based on the one episode, I could definitely recommend people check it out, especially if it kind of fits your vibe.
I not checked this out. I've watched some of End of the Effing World, but not all of it. I think, which is I feel like not out of disliking it, just out of not just not
When
picking it
all
back
the
up.
episodes just go, you just kind of lose track sometimes.
I have literally an app to help me keep track, and I still didn't finish watching it. But I liked what I saw, and this intrigued me. But I did want to wait for your because I knew you were pretty excited about it. I wanted to see your recommendation. I will check this out for next week. Seems fun. Seems very good.
Yes, I thought it was great. All right. Anything else?
I'll give you a movie recommendation.
Mm.
Strange Darling. Have you heard anything about Strange Darling,
I
Taryn?
have. I've heard it's very good, and I'm very excited to check it out.
Okay, don't look up anything about the movie.
Perfect.
Uh,
I
it
I
is,
like not to, so
yeah.
it's the confirmation is good.
Yep, but it's I endorse it. I think it's worth checking out. By JT Molnar, who wrote it and directed it. It's very good. Um, yeah, I don't want to give anything away. It's a thriller. They actually just tell you that at the very beginning of the movie. It's a thriller. So yeah, check it out. It's everybody who's I've seen watching it. Nobody is rating it poorly. That's what I'm seeing. So check it out. Go in blind. That's what I did, and it met the hype, the small amount of hype that I had heard about it before I went and watched it. So I would check that out. I also did watch Blink twice. I did go see that. I did a double header. This is the way my brain works, Taryn. I think if I'm going to the movie theater, I might as well try to catch two movies.
You thought
So
blink twice, watch twice.
yeah, that's right. So I watched Blink twice. I think I'm higher on it than other people I'm seeing. I don't think it's perfect. It is, but I think for what it is, I also saw it in a pretty packed showing, which I think is pretty rare. And I do think that elevated it to a degree for me because the moments that they wanted people to laugh, I thought worked. And this is, Naomi Aki plays a waitress who meets Channing Tatum, who's essentially Elon Musk, basically, and they go to an island, and then it's a thriller from there. And I think some of the stuff is pretty predictable, but I did think the comedy in it did work mostly. The story's a little silly, but overall, I think I liked it more than I'm seeing other people. I think last week we got some flack. I kind of said it was like kind of bombing at the box office. It didn't cost that much to make. So in terms of being a bomb, maybe is the wrong way to put it. It just didn't like it. It wasn't a breakout success in terms of like it weighed way more than its budget. But I thought it was perfectly fine. And as I said, it was like a packed theater on the second week of its showing. So I thought that was kind of like interesting that there was maybe some word of mouth. I think this relates back to the thing we were saying earlier about one thing I didn't mention in terms of like the drop releases. Like I'm going to mention a show that sort of had on the agenda, which is Dead Boy Detectives got canceled at Netflix. And this is a thing that where I saw people being like, I don't even know what this show was. And I feel like there is this thing with like both movies and television shows where it's like these streamers, if people don't watch them immediately, they feel like they were unsuccessful. And there used to be this thing of like a movie could come out and really get like, have you seen that yet? Like, you got to go to the movie theater and check it out. And not that I think Blink Twice is like the best example of this, but to some degree, it did. Like, it seems like it did. Like in its second week of showing, it seemed to maybe have a little bit more momentum than it did in its first week. And I
I
think
mean, like
yeah,
Borderlands is like already out
yeah,
on streaming, right? Like
yeah. Yeah, the Fall Guy also went, and I think that's the same studio. There is this thing of like maybe sometimes these movies they have an algorithm for like if it doesn't do this much at the theater, you might as well just put it on VOD immediately.
Lionsgate.
Yeah, to get some of the money. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is the combo of like people think it's not worth it to go, but then there's another thing of like maybe the things you like won't get made if you don't watch them immediately, which I don't think is that should be the way it is. Like I think Dead Boy Detectives was probably not perfect and maybe even like that great, but fun enough that I would have watched another season of it. But it's now been canceled because they didn't really market it and they dropped it all at once, and then it got lost and swallowed up in the Netflix thing. So I don't know. I just kind of thought Blink Twice was like not that bad, not as bad as I thought people were saying. And this is a whole expectations thing, but yeah,
Yeah.
worth waiting when it comes to a streamer. You don't need to. I just am eviscerating my point, but you don't need to wait to see it. But you rush to see it. But I thought it was pretty fun.
Yeah, it's definitely one I feel like I will, if I remember it, I will check it out.
That's fair.
Honestly.
Yeah. hmm hmm
All right. Anything else, Grace?
Um, there's some movie news, Taryn. Venice Film Festival is happening, so there's lots of
Mhm.
movie news. But separate from the Venice Film Festival, Ian McKellan has come out and said he would play Gandalf. Taryn, we didn't tie this in with Lord of the Rings earlier, but he has said, "I'll do it. I would. I think I would play Gandalf if you want me for what is the movie called? The Hunt for Gollum is the next
Yeah,
Lord of the Rings movie."
it's Lord of the Rings. I think it's the Hunt for Gollum. It's nobody. I think it's a working title. I don't think it's necessarily the final title. But it's Andy Serkis. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he is directing, producing, starring in this movie, uh, the Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum. And I have seen like, okay, we're coming around on Rings of Power, but really, The Hunt for Gollum, like we're really doing this. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm normally somebody who's like, listen, give me more. A whole movie about Gollum?
I know.
I just feel like he's a supporting character. I don't know if I can do that voice for a whole movie.
He's maybe one of the greatest supporting characters of all time. Does he need like a full movie? No, and potentially, Taryn, a trilogy of movies. So, um, but Ian McKellan has said he would come back. They just need to do it quickly, or else he won't be around to do it. So,
Listen, I mean, it'd be cool to see Ian McKellen as Gandalf again, I guess. Been a while.
oh well, he was in The Hobbit.
Nah, I don't
Like
count it.
it's not that long. It's not that long. It hasn't been that long. That's the problem. I don't know. I don't know. I think also I mean, I get the thing that it's really hard to recast like such an iconic character, but like, because I feel for Marvel and like they're probably gonna have to figure out how to recast Wolverine soon, and like that feels hard to do. I don't know how you do that, but they probably should also recast Gandalf. I mean, potentially they have in the TV show. So, but.
I think it's so weird when you recast, like when they recast Dumbledore, it was weird. You know what I mean?
Well, there was this, I think, a big win. Good news out of in California recently that if you want to have a person who is deceased play an AI role, you do have to get consent from the family estate. So, which does mean potentially Ian McKellen could play Gandalf for eternity if he signed off for it, but it would just
Oh
be
boy.
AI Ian McKellen. But at least his estate would be paid for that. So,
Well,
I don't know.
count our
Well,
blessings, I guess.
yeah. The Apprentice movie also got distribution, Taryn. You have any interest in the Apprentice movie, which is Sebastian Stan as Donald Trump and our boy Kendall Roy from Succession playing Roy Cohn? It's coming out in October. It got distribution, and Donald Trump has agreed not to litigate its release. So he's just going to hope that it bombs, and he'll make fun of it probably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not that interested in it. I haven't heard much about it beyond the fact that like they're making a movie, but like I don't know. I you know. What
So
is it really gonna be, you know?
so it is Ali Abbasi who directed the last two episodes of the first season of The Last of Us.
That's fair.
He had a movie called Holy Spider that I quite liked that came out in 2022. Like I think he's like an interesting person to do this. Sebastian Stan and starring in it, I think is to me at least somewhat interesting. The fact that they've figured out that they just basically had this like one window to get it out, which was before the election, feels bad. But I'm gonna go watch it. But I
I
don't
I
know.
I think part of it for me is I feel like, I see enough of the guy, you know what I
I
mean? I don't need to go
I
see a
know.
movie about it.
Yeah.
But, hey, you know, what are you gonna do? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Canadian, so maybe I'm like, ooh, The
Mm,
Apprentice. No, not really. But yeah, Jeremy Strong is playing Roy Cohn, which I am intrigued by choices that Jeremy Strong makes, like coming out of Possession. But like, it's not like he already hasn't had a movie. He had a movie, I think it was called Armageddon Time. It also had Anthony Hopkins in it, and I went and saw that, and I was like, that was fine. That was fine. So, I like people who are involved in this. Whether that creates a movie that is good, we shall see. But yeah,
alright. Anything else before we wrap up?
were you ever a One Tree Hill person, Taryn?
I
You
was
ever watch One
not.
Tree Hill?
No.
It so I do feel like this is a show that like it did 9 seasons. I feel like it definitely had like a peak and then it kind of ran its peak. It was really big when I was in high school. So I think that like I think we differ in age. I think I'm a little bit younger than you. And so even like by the end of my high school, I think people were like, yeah, I don't think the show maybe is good anymore. But
Ran from
talks
2003 to 2012.
yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I do kind of remember it and the OC. I feel like were at the same time. The OC kind of like got canceled after 4 seasons, and One Tree Hill kind of like kept going, maybe to its fault. And yet, of course, here we are in 2024, where they're like, maybe we should actually reboot One Tree Hill and do a sequel. So that is in the rumor mill, which I think is like, I think as Jess is saying that Jess also seemed to be a One Tree Hill person It jumped the shark pretty bad. Um, but man, it was really popular. It's got a banger of an opening theme song. I will say that. I Don't Want to Be by Gavin DeGraw. But I don't know who wants this because I feel like I don't know. I
Well,
guess it's
apparently you, I think.
well, I know it's interesting to me to think that a show that I watched in high school is now going to get rebooted to try and get us to watch it. Basically, I very much feel that like kind of with The Office as well. It's like, wow, we're trying to reboot The Office. Like, okay, all right, yeah, let's do. It. And like, I don't know. I'm in my early 30s. There, like, I don't need nostalgia bait yet. I don't think, but apparently I do. Apparently I do.
I always do.
I mean, I guess I would watch Montreal. I don't know. It's a show that I would stick with. I don't think I ever finished the full run. So
Listen, every time they make a Death Note adaptation, I'm in every single time. That's they, you know, that if they can get you with
oh,
nostalgia, they can get you.
oh, Jess has an interesting point in the chat. That is there. We need to call like, is it the podcast phenomenon where the people who are on the show go and make a podcast rewatching the show that they were
Mhm.
on, Boy Meets World. Jess can tell me what else there would be. And the Full
Scrubs.
House got rebooted. Scrubs has interest in being rebooted. The Office ladies. I don't like, we can connect that to the reboot. I don't know. But is this world where the podcast happens and then there's a demand? People perceive it to be a demand that people would watch a rebooted version of the thing that they did a podcast on, not realizing that the whole point is like, no, we're going to go back and watch the thing. We don't want new things of the thing. But some podcast phenomenon of rebooting shows, Taryn. That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean that has been a topic of conversation revolving around the Scrubs thing because it's not just that there's now potentially renewed interest and it's showing that there's still an audience for it, but it's also that I think sometimes the actors who are doing the podcast are like remembering the fond times and also themselves realizing, wow, we're getting a lot of attention for this. It's been a while, and then
Also, no offense to the
having a
people who
lot
are starting
more.
these podcasts, but if the thing you are doing is going to, because we're on a podcast right now, Taryn, but if you were like making a podcast instead of being on the new hit show that you're on, it might tell you about your desire to. If then people are like, "Do you want to do a reboot of that show that you were on?" Like it tells you something.
Right. I think it like it creates a desire in those people to go back to it and have those conversations. And then there you go. Just like that. There's conversations about these reboots and they don't always end up actually happening. But yeah, I think that that could definitely be a bit of a phenomenon going.
Okay, so last week I participated in some, engagement bait. I know I talked about Rings of Power doing it, but I asked people what's the healthiest franchise. I did get some interesting answers. Some people thought it might be Dune. People think Game of Thrones might still be in the slot as long as House of Dragon does well. Some interesting responses to what is the healthiest franchise.
Mhm.
Now, I'm going to do it again this week, which I'm going to say, which show would you most want? And I'm talking to you, Taryn, or the podcast listener. Do you want to reboot it? In which case, who do they want me to reach out to try and get them to start a rewatch podcast of their show so that the show gets rebooted? Do you have a show that you feel like never like finished? Like I feel like that's the key to I think is like, what have we not squeezed all the juice out of, as opposed to the opposite, which is like networks thinking that they like have you not squeeze enough out of The Office and like definitely not. They're
I mean,
squeezing it.
I definitely have to think about it. I mean, obviously, the one that came to mind immediately was Death Note. Um,
Yeah.
I think that especially with the success of something like One Piece recently, I think and I think that studios know this because they've tried to tap into Death Note so many times, but nobody's ever gotten it. But I think Death Note has a huge mainstream appeal in terms of an anime slash manga, and if done well, could spawn a whole franchise genre. And also for what it's worth, I think at least me, and I think this used to be the opinion. I don't know if it's changed, but like doesn't have a great ending. Could be changed.
Mhm. Right. Right.
could
I
could be messed
yeah.
around with a little bit.
I saw so many One Piece costumes at Fan Expo when I was there. That's like there's so many, and I know it's like because it's both like it's mostly probably the anime, the manga, but okay, Death Note. I think I'm gonna try and get the people in Mindhunter to do a Mindhunter podcast so we get Mindhunter rebooted on Netflix. That's my plan.
Oh, that's so
And then
Fincher dependent though.
who?
Those actors can ask Fincher, and he'll be like, "Yeah, 100 more times, please."
All right, well then, Freaks and Geeks. I'm gonna get all the Freaks and Geeks people to get together. Yes, and then we'll reboot that, and I'll reach out on your behalf to the Death Note people to get them to do a podcast, and then the show will get rebooted. It's a surefire
Okay,
way to get the show back on the air. Turn.
perfect.
All right, well, the audience should tell me what they want rebooted, but first we have to get a rewatch podcast of the original thing, and then we'll get the new show.
Okay, sounds good.
That's all I got this week, Taryn. That's what I got.
All right. Well, that is what we have then here this week on the Tastemakers. We'll of course be back next week to talk through what is going on. We'll try to make sure we look up Terminator Zero, give
Uh,
that a shot. Other than that, I don't think there's too much else going on this week in terms of television. Not that I have seen that is standing out to me. I know Slow Horses is getting
yes.
its fourth season going. But like I said, that's one that I dropped off of. Although I was told that season 3 might be more my speed.
I think that's true. Probably, yeah. I think someone chastised me for not telling you that season 3 would be
Hmm.
more up your alley. Soldiers, I think it's very good. I'm gonna check it out when it drops. The other one that has been circulating in terms of like interesting is this Chimp Crazy doc on Max. People have been I've seen some buzz that it's interesting. It's a documentary about someone who calls herself the Dolly Parton of chimps. So I might check out that as well. It's sort of it's from the makers of Tiger King.
Yeah, that was
So,
my instant thought. It just feels like such a we're just trying to recreate Tiger King.
but with monkeys this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, stay tuned. Thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, check out the Rings of Power coverage from Grace and I. Grace also covering industry at the moment as that is picking up steam. So tune in for all of that here at We Know Scripted TV. Anything else, Grace?
No, that's what I got going on. Yep.
All right. Well,
Oh, I
thank
was
you
just
all.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I will be on the Talking Shit Pod with Jess Sterling. Episode should come out later this week where I talk about the season 2 finale of Schitt's Creek. Did you do Schitt's Creek, Taryn? Did you do Yeah, no, that's okay. It's just a beloved Canadian gem that you've abandoned. That's fine.
Yeah.
Season 2 finale is what many people consider to be sort of like not the moment the show got good, but the moment where like people feel like they like really fell in love with the show. So that's the episode I asked Jess to be on. I joined Justin Stewart to do that, so that should be dropping this week as well.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here today. We will see all of you next time.